everybody. This is Magnum Pi. We are Initiative Zero. I'm here, as always, with Dark Templar, Vahilo, Taekcu, and Golgotha. And yeah, we're doing a new Gamemaster Month recording for you guys this month. It is new Gamemaster Month, at least according to a few people that really think that there need to be more new Game Masters, and we agree. Evil Hat Productions, Arc Dream, Chaosium, Pelgrane Press, Atlas Games, and Monty Cook Games have gotten together to do this promo. And we'll put the link in our info down below this video. All through January, it's new Game Master Month, where they help people become Game Masters, so that by February 1st, you are running your own game. And we thought, hey, you know what we do? We kind of play role-playing games. And some of us even have run role-playing games. And some of us are planning on running role-playing games. And so we thought it would be a really good idea if we kind of gave our views on that whole endeavor. So that's what we're going to do in this little bit here. And so yeah, if this is one of the things that you're interested in taking on, or possibly criticizing one of your own game masters, saying, look, see, this is how it can be done, then please listen, give us a like down below if you like us, subscribe if you think that you want to hear more stuff like this, put comments, interact. We have a Discord, hop on there, and yeah. So I think what we're going to do is, we'll just kind of say hello to everybody here. How's everybody doing?
Oh, good. How are you?
Hungry?
Yep.
Hey, guys.
Cool.
Not doing all right.
No, I'm not doing too good, but sorry.
Why aren't you doing well?
I separated my shoulder yesterday.
Well, that's not fun.
Yeah, I'm in a sling right now.
What did you do?
I was skiing, and I hurt myself. I fell, barrel rolled, and separated my shoulder, which is not a dislocation, by the way. Nor is it a break.
No, it's very
separation.
different.
So what exactly do you separate?
My shoulder.
No,
and
but
it's ligaments that hold it together.
Oh, okay, I see. It's a ligamentary thing. Fun.
Ligamentary, yes, my dear Watson.
Ligamentary.
You see, that's why when I go skiing, I just sit in the chalet by the fire and drink hot chocolate.
Well, it was my first time skiing.
Oh, this is your first time skiing?
Yeah.
So it's memorable.
Yes. Very.
Cool. But if I'm not mistaken, DT, the Gotham Chronicle, which is the chronicle that we have just kind of wrapped up, our recordings are just finishing posting. They'll post throughout the rest of January, along with this recording in January, which you're probably listening to now. But that was not your first go at game mastering.
No, it was not. Though it might seem like it to a lot of our listeners. No, it was not my first time game mastering. My first time game mastering that particular world in its rules, but not my first time game mastering, no.
Okay, so what was your first time game mastering?
I believe I did a one-shot with the Numenera, which is a Monty Cook game, by the way. Plug right there, baby. But yeah, that was my first one as well. Kind of did like a one-shot there. I did some D&D here and there as well. But I think that first ever one was Numenera.
Cool. That's cool. So that must have been then after we had piloted it, because we were one of the play testers. Our group was one of the play testers for the first edition Numenera.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, that's cool. All right. So tell us about your game mastering experience. What was it like when you first took it on, and then kind of your most recent experience with the Gotham Chronicle? What was that like?
So the first one that I did, was very sandboxy. Kind of had a beginning, middle, end of where I want things to go, and it wasn't as open world for sure. And I think I was definitely not nearly as nervous to do something like that, because it was kind of a lot of the outcome was already predetermined, because it wasn't going to be a one shot. It was kind of just have fun, kind of play with the rules a little bit, and kind of just be imaginative. But it wasn't anything too spectacular. It was more like a dungeon crawl with a little bit of story into it, so it wasn't nearly as, immersive. And because I knew the characters were going to be one and done anyways, it didn't really matter whether they survived the entire scenario or not, because after that it was done anyways, right? Kind of like just give it your all, and whatever happens, and the cards will be laid where they are. But recently, with the Chronicles of Darkness here, the Gotham Chronicle that we just did, I definitely took a lot more time developing a story. And that was definitely a little more nerve-wracking because sometimes you don't realize how the characters, because it's such an open world, World Darkness, compared to other games that we have played, especially RPG games. And it definitely takes on its own dynamic. You don't know how each player is going to react or going to follow through with your ideas or your story or any of those things. It just kind of, you got to kind of let it go, right? And that's a little more nerve-wracking. Also, I found that what if they didn't like the story? I was kind of second guessing myself, whether they were going to enjoy the story, whether it's going to be too dark or too light. They were all experienced gamers here, and sometimes it could be some people have seen this kind of shtick before, and they're like, "Oh, another one of these," or "Well, it's actually going to be interesting," or they're going to be really involved into it. And of course, 3 years later, playing this Chronicle, I know that we did not record all 3 years of it, guys, but it was 3 years.
The last year was what we got in there, but that's okay.
Something like that, yeah. But yeah, it's been a while. We've been playing these gentlemen here have been playing these characters for quite a long time, and so they are this character for 3 years, and they have their own personalities. They've kind of grown into their own, and you can work with that as a GM afterwards with your story that you've created as well. What do you guys think of the story?
I enjoyed it. The fact that it was 3 years is kind of wild. I don't think. I was going to say I've never played one that long, but that's not entirely true. I think the previous time we did a World of Darkness thing under Magnum, I think that was close to 3 years, if not a little bit longer. But yeah, you kind of live the character and you kind of embody it. For me, it's weird because I was playing this kind of nebbish kind of nerdy character, which is nothing like me in real life, of course. But yeah, it's you become kind of attached to it.
Yeah, I'll say I enjoyed it. I'll say the plot had more twists than a pretzel factory. It was, it was round and around, but it was cool because you really looped things back in that you introduced way at the beginning, and everything kind of got brought back together. And I know that there were some plot threads that we didn't quite tug on, but overall, I think, like from my experience game mastering, there's always the perception that things aren't going well because they aren't going according to plan. But from the player perspective, we don't know what your plan is. And, we thought everything was going just fine, right? At least I did. And it sounds like Golki did too. But yeah. So, yeah, what about Vahilo and Taekcu? What'd you guys think of DT's stories?
It always felt like you had a direction that you were not pushing for, but you had planned out. And there was never really any concern over running off the rails because you did have more of a sandboxy approach on this one, which was good because we definitely ran it off the rails a couple times. And
I think Delaware strings is a...
And that's a great example.
Yeah.
I mean, Delaware was my favorite one.
Absolutely Delaware.
Basically out of pure spite, and I loved every moment of it. It was just wonderful.
A spite-powered misadventure. Just, oh yeah, you want to go to Delaware? All right, let's go to Delaware.
And that, by the way, is where we started recording. Is where DT was game mastering out of spite,
just ad-libbing. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that was interesting when we're talking about things going according to plan and what the plan is from the game master. I mean, we just kind of said, during downtime we're going to go to Delaware. We'll call it a company retreat, grab some extra large clips for our guns. And then we'll just go back to Gotham, and that'll be our downtime.
Yeah. Just to add, we were a law firm going for extra large clips.
Yeah,
I think that
like the lead-in. This whole Delaware thing started because we were like, "Oh, we want some extra large clips for our firearms," and DT turned around with, "Well, that's not legal in this state, so that's not going to fly." And of course, being lawyers, we're sitting there going, "Well, according to a Google search, Delaware is legit." We can just go there and get these things. And this turned into a back and forth of, okay, yeah, you're going to go to Delaware. And I feel like you genuinely muted your microphone and went and just pulled up some really twisted ad lib of, okay, we're going to Delaware to deal with flick bikers that are flick werewolves. All right.
No, I did actually.
You're screwed.
You're absolutely right. I immediately started writing on my pad. Actually, I have the notes still here in my collection of paper here. Actually, they're yellow, and the first thing says "fuck you guys," and the second part.
No, that tracks.
That's definitely
important.
Yeah.
That's definitely Dark Templar. Yeah.
And so I went and started writing. Like, I literally started writing about like how I was going to. It was supposed to be a one shot that turned into like 6 months, but I basically just went online. I found the map of Delaware, and then found a place in which they could travel to get these clips. Made a story about these bikers, and that was it. I just really wanted to screw with these guys as they're getting their clips from Delaware. So yeah, it turned into a really fun piece. But I was writing like crazy. Like I had like 6 minutes, and I was just like, okay, they want to screw with me. I'm getting them back, and that's how it kind of worked. So sometimes you get inspired from the most, from anger as well.
Yeah, it's important to recognize that we've known each other for a couple of years. So if you're a starting out GM, maybe don't start writing from a place of spite. I mean,
that's right. Be kind
or do.
I'm not gonna generalize here, but I'm also gonna generalize here, and that's probably not a great place to start. It might work for you, and if that's what you're going for, great. But
now my question for DT through all that is, those characters that we came across and that stuff happening with the hunt and the chase that was going on, is that something that would have happened in Gotham as part of the regular story? Did you just take it and place the different setting, or did you pull anything from the original story that you had written to kind of take place now in Delaware and not in Gotham?
Absolutely not. No, I did not. I did not plan to do this one shot at all. And it had nothing to do with anything I was going to do with Gotham at all. And I just literally just started. I didn't stop writing. While I was writing and saying, "All right, you guys want to Delaware? This is how we're going to start it." And then after the first session had ended, I spent like hours writing more stuff just to because I'm like, "Oh crap! Now I shot myself in the mouth and shot myself in the foot. Now I have to really flesh this out." And then it just kept on going, and the story got richer and we got more involved.
So is that even all the way down to some of the stuff that we accomplished? Like I think when Taekcu was kind of going through, I think it was Taekcu going through when there were all the fairies, and he kind of got some things that he used back in Gotham. And,
right.
When I was in the forest kind of rescuing Diego, I got that gun that was kind of designed like a bear.
Yeah.
Was any of that recycled from Gotham, or is that all just fresh that you wrote into the week after we decided to go to Delaware?
So those last pieces with the fairies at the end, the changelings, and then with the weapon that you had received, that part was supposed to be in Gotham, yes. Because eventually I had to tie it back somehow, right? And so I had to find an opening of when I was going to do that. And when Gunther eventually entered. Yes.
Not Gunther.
Exactly. I even have it written here as Gunther too. When I decided to put him into the story, he was not an original character either. And in fact, to tell you the truth, I wasn't really planning to put werewolves into the Gotham Chronicle at all. But because they were there and they're kind of like the anti-vampire, and then having those changelings just being in the force there kind of thing and protecting that kind of realm, and it kind of worked out that way for me.
And bikers kind of made sense as werewolves too.
Sure, but especially in the world of darkness maybe. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't my plan to put werewolves into it, but I had to figure out how to tie you guys back in after this really, really one long shot in Delaware to the actual story. Otherwise, it'd be just useless, right?
Yeah. I remember
and I only asked that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I only asked that because I know sometimes when we played games that were kind of run by Magnum, we'd as characters we'd go into a nondescript bar and we'd see somebody at the bar, and it didn't seem like for Magnum that it mattered what city we're in. We would go and talk to somebody at the bar, and we'd get the same, information that helped us with that point that where we were. And for yours, DT, it seemed very like unnatural in the sense that we were going to Delaware and we were out of Gotham, but natural in the sense that it's almost like you had a lot of that stuff prepared beforehand. So, kudos to you for preparing a lot of that, in that week after we made that change.
Oh yeah,
Thanks.
for sure,
Thanks.
man. I mean,
I think one of the things that's got to be really important is like you got to take what your players give to you too, right? And kind of adapt from that. Sorry, Magnum, you were going to say something?
I was just saying, it totally seemed like you were incorporating threads from what you had previously planned and just reworking it. Like it was totally cohesive, so it was pretty cool. Yeah.
No, I'm glad it worked out that way. I had a lot of time, especially in that 3 months that we were playing it. Was it 3 months or even longer? I'm not even sure. But like, I had time to.
It took a while.
Work something in there.
It was quite
But
the
being like
sidetrack.
but being improvisational is so important in a game like Chronicles of Darkness because it's so open, right? And there's so many things you can do. So even if like limited knowledge, and I'm sure a lot of people that were listening to the Werewolf Courts and were like, that's not the rule, right? And probably wasn't necessarily always the rule either. And that's my apologies. I didn't read up nearly as much about Werewolf, the Forsaken or whatever it was, to do that. But I kind of I worked with the working knowledge I had and kind of made the best of it. I really avoided, if you're listening closely to the recordings, I really avoided a lot of those mechanics on purpose to make sure that it was a little bit more mysterious that they weren't necessarily werewolves. Because I don't think they even used the word werewolves till maybe right at the end. Like, I don't think I even really used them. So it was always kind of ambiguous state, so I didn't have to actually use too many of those rules as well. I'm sure some of the metagaming that was perhaps happening, maybe Templar, you haven't used this rule or whatnot, but it wasn't necessarily. I kind of kept it in the shadows, so it wasn't necessarily I had to roll for this or running away from that, or you were so scared of this, Garu transformation or whatever it could be.
Well, the Randy Savage clone was the one that gave it away for me.
That was awesome, wasn't it? The Randy Savage?
Yeah. The guy with the ropes for veins in his neck. I think that's a good point, though. You talk about mechanics, right? And I think, in my experience, I've never DM'd before, GM before myself. Well, that's not true. I actually have, but again, very, very short one. But I think a lot of people who start off, they get really tied up in the mechanics, and it has to be very precise. And if they're not doing it, they're doing it wrong. And I think the way to look at the mechanics are there for it's there to give you an idea of what how to go about doing it, rather than a hard rule. Depending on your game, you might change things up a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I've been kind of reading back into the original D&D rule set. I bought them off of Drive Through RPG, and I've been reading through, and then those original rules that came out in 74. Gary Gygax and Arneson there, they both said, like these are the rules to build the game, but you feel free to improvise, right? Like it's like built into the original role-playing game that the rules are there to serve you, not the other way around. Then Gygax actually said, screw that. First edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons said, no, you must play by these rules. Then he got fired. But, but still, the original envisionment was really just kind of a way of making wargaming more character-based and to just kind of play with the rules as you would to actually get there. But back to what I was going to say a little while ago, DT, you and I had talked after games and stuff like that, about just kind of how it was going and things like that, and just kind of game mastery chit chat stuff. But I remember, talking about the fact that, you make all these notes, you have all these plans, and then they literally, the players will make a decision and they just go right over your right shoulder. Excuse me. And that's it for them. Like what percentage would you say of what you had prepared for the Gotham Chronicle did you not make use of? Did you just kind of throw over your shoulder and go, oh, well, I guess we're not going there?
I would say probably about 40 to 70%. Yeah,
That's a big range.
yeah.
Anywhere from half to 3/4.
See, it's hard.
So
to
what
say.
you're saying is we screwed you over continuously.
Oh, continuously. But the hard part is like because obviously you have all the recordings of all the screw jobs from before we start recording.
Screw jobs.
Oh
my God.
Just saying. But also, like, I might have something even just like I might have an idea that day, right when we record and when we play, and we might touch on like 20 to 30% of it one week and a second week, but then our third week we might actually hit like 80% of what I'm doing. So it's kind of hard to kind of give you a certain percentage. I know it's obviously a large range, but some nights we would go off the rails. Like I would be like, okay, so here's plot point happening here, and you'd be like, nope, we're going left. I'm like, okay, I'm glad we decided to do that. So let's run with it. And literally wouldn't even touch the paper for the rest of anything I wrote down for the rest of the evening. And it's not bad for that either. It was, you try to work something in because I have a lot of hooks here and there that I kind of want to draw you into. So if you didn't fall into one trope, maybe whatever you guys were doing would lead into another one kind of situation. So it's not posted on my wall or anything. I have like, little, conspiratorial, threads going from A to Z and connecting, pictures to each other or anything like that. But I did have a lot of ins. And I think that's really important. If you have a story this large, then you have to have a lot of points in which the characters can touch upon and then be intrigued by and perhaps pull on that thread. I know I'm saying the word thread lightly because I'm sure that gives Taekcu a little bit of a twitch in the eye there because there were so many threads in this particular story and which ones you could pull and which ones you didn't pull on as well. And so that sometimes can be a good thing and a bad thing because it could be too many side quests. But also by having a lot of strings that you can pull on can lead you into the main story, lead you back to a main story or section.
Yeah. I know.
That depends very much on the game you're playing. Like something like World of Darkness, you need a broader set of threads and plot hooks just going every which way. Depending on your story, of course, but that setting lends itself to that because it is more storytelling based. Whereas something like a D&D, which is more, combat oriented, may not need so much GM investment in that regard.
Yeah, it depends on the game for sure. I mean, there's some really simple games too that are one-pagers that have all the rules on one page, basically.
Yep.
And, there's not a lot. You just kind of wing it. There's not a lot of story going on. The rules kind of make the story. But then there's other games that are very, very plot-based. And what we're going to be doing next, our next chronicle on Initiative Zero is going to be the Second City Chronicle, which is kind of a redux of the original World of Darkness game that was played with me by Dark Templar, Vahilo, and Golgotha, and a couple other people that aren't part of this group. But it's redone in the sense that one was very much a plot-based game. The original Chronicle was very much a plot-based game. This one is very much going to be kind of a sandboxy kind of game. And if you guys want to see new game masters, I highly recommend Matt Colville's videos. He talks a great deal about the difference between sandboxy games and railroad games. I wouldn't go so far as to say that all plot-based games are railroads, but they can easily fall into that where you drag your players through a plot, come hell or high water. It doesn't really matter what their choices are. But a good game master, I say humbly, will take player choices and weave them into the pattern that they want to progress the plot anyway. Like people who thought they were becoming a mage and turned into a vampire.
Too soon.
Too soon? Still?
Too soon.
That was 11 years ago.
Doesn't matter. It wasn't 11 years ago. Was it 11 years ago? Actually, I don't know.
It was like a decade ago, man. Yeah.
I'm pretty
Mike,
sure.
no, it can't be a decade. It can't be that long.
I think it was 11.
It was shortly after I just started doing role-playing games with you guys. And that was shortly after I got my permanent job with the company, and that was in May of 2012.
So 10 years
Holy
ago.
hell.
So yeah, 11 years ago. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Still soft, still sore.
Oh
still
my
sore.
god.
Yeah,
It's that. Oh my god. I feel so old.
that's all right.
We are old.
Well, shut up.
You're at least 11 years older.
Well, older than that. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At least, man.
yeah.
Some of us age faster than others. Don't get me wrong.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. Fuck
Yeah.
all of
So, DT, you kind of really dug in for the what I like to call the epic. Right. This was an epic campaign.
Yeah.
It lasted 3.5 years ish. For new game masters, what's the biggest takeaway? What's the one thing that you could tell a new game master about doing that deep dive when they take on a game like that? Because you built it yourself from the ground up, pretty much. So
Right. So I guess a thing of advice is you got to really decide whether you're going to make characters yourself or let the players that are playing your game choose their own character or create their own characters. That's number one, because that's going to really determine who's going to be like your tank, who's going to be your social character, who's going to be like your jack of all trades, who's going to be your nerdy kind of person, intelligence, sciencey kind of dude or dudette. But like that's one thing. The second thing is when you're writing your story, make it loose. Don't be frustrated if the characters that are playing don't do what you want them to do. Don't try to curate so much that they have no choice but to be in your sandbox, right? In a game like this, that's so epic. If you're playing to have the characters really play their role, you gotta let it go. You gotta be able to let go and let them be creative themselves. Some of the best games that I GM'd during this chronicle, I barely even spoke or I barely even had them roll anything. And they just went and just played by themselves essentially for like an hour and so minutes. And it was awesome because I literally didn't do anything. And they somewhat followed my story anyways, right? But they kind of they're really involved. They were really involved in their characters. They were, playing off each other and making relationships and, backstabbing a few or having an argument with you, which is very, if you're talking about like, if this is a real life kind of in Second City, right? People are going to do that regardless, right? Not everyone's going to be always goal mindseted or their goal mindset or trying to beat the baddie every single time. Sometimes it's just kind of, you gotta let things, fall where they will and just kind of run with that. And then at the end, pick up the scraps and kind of either lead them here and there if they're falling too far away or too tangential from everything, and kind of rope them back in a little bit, or you let us see where it goes, right? Maybe they'll decide, hey, we want to go to this church or this abandoned building or this, that, and the other, or attack this person. And you're like, okay, cool, let's do it, right? And then you might throw an obstacle in the way, or they might just not succeed themselves based on roles that they choose. I'll give you an example. I'm not sure if this has been released yet, maybe. Well, when they reach the Requiem, and they're trying to infiltrate, for example. Have we released that one already?
Oh yeah, that's been up. Yeah.
Okay. So when they're trying to infiltrate, I only had a very loose idea of how they were going to infiltrate. I knew what the end goal was, where they're infiltrating to, but how they went and infiltrated was completely up to them. They had plenty of options. They scouted out. I believe they go in during the day as like posers of like investments, like investors, right? And I didn't make that up. They did, right? I barely had them roll for that. And then they met a few people, had a few good social roles that I didn't even ask them to roll for, really. They kind of rolled for it. They wanted to roll, see if they can convince or persuade or, charm the young lady that was there. They got to the roof. They checked out the bathrooms. They checked out here, there, otherwhere. They split up really well. They went to the security thing that I didn't expect them to do either. While two of them played diversion, that was all them. That was not me at all. They just, when the two brothers go at it and one punches the other, and that's all planned.
No.
Awesome.
I tried
so
to punch him. I tried to punch him, and I rolled shitty.
I have never seen people kicked out of a nightclub when it wasn't open and it was empty.
Yeah, but yeah, no, like things like that. Like I didn't script any of that. They did all of that, and that's the fun part about being a GM, when you have to even use your creativity and it comes out amazingly because the players are that invested and they're enjoying themselves as they're playing. And so that part is definitely the advice I give is just if you're going to do an epic like this, to kind of let the characters do their thing and not try to be so controlling. Only when they need it, right? And you'll see your spots when they get really too off the charts there. Then you can kind of roll them back in. But other than that, though, like, let the players play. They'll, especially experienced players, they'll know to like that what they're doing, and they'll probably have an end goal that you perhaps can tie into your story afterwards.
All right, cool. So let's jump over to Taekcu. Now, Taekcu, I know you've tried your hand at GMing as well, and how long have you been doing that?
On and off for a couple of years now, actually.
Okay.
I mean, I've done a one shot for you guys. I don't believe we recorded that one.
No.
I ran a longer one for some friends outside of this group. In a couple of different scenarios and games and settings and all that. And I mean, it went well enough. They enjoyed it. And I was as you said, pretty critical of myself during the entire process until you hit your stride and you get comfortable and you sort of get into the groove that you feel you're good with as a GM. And as far as a piece of advice I would give, it would probably be to do your best balancing player agency and managing the story you want to tell. Because one of the best things you can do, and we've already sort of touched on it, is getting that buy-in from your players, letting them influence the story as it's developing. And so I prefer to try and say yes to more or less everything they're suggesting, provided it's legitimate within the rule set. But then you end up like just way out in left field, and that's where improv really comes into it. So you end up with insane situations where you're trying to run what you figure to be a fairly simple and direct story, and in this case it was in Numenera, and one player ended up running a character that had 4 manifestations.
Jeez.
It existed in 2 places at once, and it ended up randomly rolling 2 homunculi. So I was like, all right, well, we're going to go with that, I guess. And the other player was, of course, a time traveler, because that was just really helpful for managing the storytelling components. Yeah, pick simple and direct character, guys. Yeah, no, not at all. But again, it all falls to where you're comfortable. Like, I'm a little more comfortable improvising, and I'm not in a rush at any given point to get to the end of a story, provided everyone's having a good time. I mean, it's a little different now, maybe because we're recording, and so we can't. Well, apparently we can, if Delaware's any indication.
I was going to say, we haven't really rushed anything.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, it's the biggest challenge has always been managing the telling of your story relative to getting your players to buy in. If you spend too much time narrating, do everyone a favor, go write a book. And this isn't to be critical. It's just you've picked the wrong platform. This is a game featuring multiple people. If your players aren't contributing, they're not playing, they're listening.
I think that's a really good point, right? And it's sometimes you just get those story ideas that you want to tell that story.
Mm-hmm. And fair enough.
Yeah, and that's where you run the risk of railroading, I think.
Yeah.
When it's more about your story than it is about... What I like about the second edition of Chronicles of Darkness is that they explicitly call it out, that it is a communal storytelling game. That it's not, like, you don't even have to choose a storyteller per se. You can just everybody can just start telling the story together, and one person's going to just kind of take charge at some point. Or you can just choose to have a honest to God storyteller, right? But yeah, that's the biggest thing. And the thing is that people that want to take on game mastering, a lot of them Not every one of them, and that's fine. A lot of them, though, are very creative people and come up with a lot of ideas and just want to tell that story. But you're right. You might as well write a book if you want to control all the characters. But you know what's funny is that even really good authors will say that as they start writing and as they continue to write their stories, the characters kind of tell the story themselves. I remember listening to an interview about Breaking Bad and the writers for Breaking Bad trying to figure out, what was going to come next for the next season and things like that. And they just found that the story was kind of just writing itself, that the characters they had fleshed out so much and had so much detail that they really just would dictate, like the character would dictate what would happen, right? This is what that character would do. And so even really good writers, I think, at some point, the characters take on the story and tell the story. And they step back and just kind of watch the story flow. And so it's kind of a little bit of both. But you're right. I think that there really needs to be that relinquishment of control and willingness to let other people edit your story, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's not the full relinquishment. It's the understanding that you have a responsibility as the GM to share that control. I mean, you have at least as much input as everyone else, but you also fill the role of sort of moderating everything. And so it is a bit of a balancing act that way, but that is in no uncertain terms what you're taking on in that role. And so it's good to understand that.
Cool. All right. Now, let's jump to Vahilo. Vahilo, you were prepping a game. I don't know if you still are. Life kind of takes those twists and turns, as we know from our recording history here. But talk to me about that, because you have not yet GM'd, but you were preparing to. So what's...
No, so my, for all the listeners there, as I said previously, my first exposure into role-playing games was about 10 and a half years ago. When I met Magnum and DT and Golgotha, and there were some others playing with us, and then a little bit while later, Taekcu came along. But yeah, I've been kind of working on a story and kind of dividing it up into a number of different chapters, and this is kind of where I want the characters to go for the first little bit. And then kind of, almost like how DT set up the Gotham Chronicle here, where it's, okay, well, what do you want to do next? Where do you want to go? How do you want to get there? And leave it a little bit more open-ended with a number of different chapters, I guess I'd say, which kind of can be, played at any time whenever the characters want to pull on those strings. Some of the things that I'm worrying about right now are, as DT said, 40 to 70% of the stuff that he had, he threw away. So I'm wondering, well, if I take away 70% of what I have, do I have enough? And with some of the improv that this group has, do I have enough to kind of deal with, well, if they do this, well, that's another string that they're pulling on. Maybe I can take them down this path with this story. So just kind of, making sure that I have enough and kind of I cover some of those bases right off the bat before we get going.
Yeah, it's always a funny thing to think about how much you should prepare and how much is almost too much. I mean, you can come up with a really interesting set of narrative devices and encounters, but if your players get to that fork in the road and go, you know what, absolutely not, and pull a hard left and leave the fork behind completely, then you're hooped. And you either take the assets you've created and plug them in somewhere else. You can reskin them if need be, or you just kind of close the notepad and leave it there. And I mean, that is kind of heartbreaking, but it is something that you may have to do. So I get your hesitation on that.
Well, in the game that I'm playing, And it would be interesting to hear, from some of you that have played or who have done more role playing games. Um, the game that I'm playing is kind of in a dystopian world. Whereas the Gotham Chronicle, the Second City Chronicle that's coming up, they're set in present day, human civilization, where exactly we can say, well, Delaware has larger clips, so we're going to go to Delaware and we're going to go and get these things. Whereas in kind of a dystopian world, you can't really just Google stuff and say, well, this community over here has this resource that we need, so we're going to go over there, right? So is it something, for DT or for Magnum? Is it something where in those types of games, as the GM, you have a little bit more control than as something that's based in present reality?
Well, I mean, I would say, and I'll get into my experiences in the past. I've been doing this for a long time, but I'd say that it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, if you're basing a game in a real-world setting that is obviously a fictional version of a real-world setting, you have the great resource of the world that exists to draw on, so you don't have to think of a lot of things. But of course, you can quickly get caught up in trying to anchor yourself to that real world. Right, so you quickly can be like, oh well, we can't go there because that place is not actually on 34th Street; it's on 52nd Street, and you guys are too far away, and so we have to find somewhere else. Or you could just say for your fictional world, well, it's actually on 34th Street. So that in that way, it frees you in the sense that you can just look up stuff. You don't have to come up with stuff yourself. But you can get tied to the way the real world actually is. In a dystopian setting or a fantasy setting or a completely other world like Numenera setting, it's actually not that much different if you're dealing with a very well-built world. Because a very well-built world will have a lot of information already available to you in the lore that will say, oh, well, this country supplies crossbows, but they don't have crossbows here, or something like that. And you can get quickly caught up in that, trying to stick to the world as it's written, and that can be at the expense of your story. Or you can just say, like, well, it's my story anyway, I'm just going to put crossbows here, even though they don't really have them. But I would say those fictional settings, they give you the freedom of being able to make up more, because most of the time your players don't actually know all the lore. Whereas players who live in the real world, although I've played with people that might not actually live in the real world, but those people that live in the real world, they will know certain things and be like, wait a minute, they can't actually be there. Or like playing with a historian in a historical setting. Whew, that can get pretty rough. But especially if you don't pull them aside and go, hey, fictional history based on, right, like that sort of thing. So it really depends. If you have a detailed world, whether it's real or not, you can easily get caught up in that rigidness of the setting, or you can feel free to make it up. So it has to do with your getting. I think it's kind of how Taekcu is saying. Once you get into stride, once you get used to it and everything like that, you feel that you have that freedom and that liberty to just kind of do stuff.
And I mean, to look at that example of, say, armaments, and we'll take it and we'll drop it into DT's Delaware adventure. Let's say he gave us the extended clips, and as the story went on, he decided, you know what, this is a little, it's unbalancing. It's a little too strong in the player's favor. You don't have to just retcon it and say, okay, guys, I'm not giving that to you. You look at your setting and you look at the implications of that item or concept in that setting. We could get pulled over by the cops at any point, get searched, and they could turn around and say, okay, you have these clips, you shouldn't have these. So they're being confiscated. Or when we were attempting to go into Requiem, we go through a metal detector. If someone's carrying it, well, it gets confiscated. It's gone. Like there are ways for a creative GM to regulate what does and does not happen. And again, it is that balancing act of, like, you want to let the players have a certain amount of agency, but without letting them take advantage of the setting through that agency. And you don't want them to totally derail your story and more or less start overriding any direction you might be looking to push.
There were so many opportunities we had to bring, like you mentioned the weapons, and
Yeah.
I think of how many times, like I my sword, how many opportunities I like to use my sword, but I can't because of this or because of that. So in terms of weapons, you generally, I think we found most of the time we were kind of playing by wits rather than fighting as a result of having to do that. Like by the end we were pretty stacked. We could handle ourselves physically, but that wasn't going to win us. I mean, I'm seeing using that kind of rhetoric, right? That wasn't going to help us in the game ultimately. I think.
Yeah, and every setting and story will have its own nuance. The prime example I would give is the boom gun in Rifts.
Oh, the boom gun.
It's great fun.
Yeah, sweet boom.
It is great fun. But
the 2 times you used it,
you will never get a chance to use that fucking thing.
Well, it depends, though. It depends.
If you don't mind being chased out of the city you just leveled by firing it off, you can use it whenever you want.
That's the thing. It has a very particular. It's basically a tank, right? And I think that's the big thing. Like, if you're going to give your players something as the game master, you're going to give them the magic weapon that is like an artifact in D&D, or the boom gun in Rifts, or the demon sword in Chronicles of Darkness. You have to use the rule of Chekhov's gun, right? And that's a playwriting rule that says that if you put a gun on the stage, at some point during the play, it's got to go off, right? Like if you're going to introduce that gun into your story, you need to use it. And so if you're going to give your players these things, you've got to give them the opportunity to let them go. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen in every instance. So for example, what Taekcu's referring to is a Rifts game that I ran, because I love Rifts. Megaversal Rifts, not Savage Rifts, although I like Savage Rifts, but Megaversal Rifts is my tooth cutting game. So, but the thing is, they were in a SDC town, if you know anything about Rifts, and to fire off a boom gun would basically shatter every pane of glass in the whole town.
Start knocking
as well
buildings
as
over.
As make everybody run away from you, and you would never have any friends. But had we continued in that game, there was going to be ample opportunity for the boom gun to really shine. But it was just we didn't get there yet. But that's the thing. But that's a failing on my part, because you needed to feel the ability to use that weapon more frequently than you had in order for it to actually have been worthwhile putting it on the scene. So
it's a bit of a red herring, like a Chekhov's herring almost.
Chekhov's herring. I'm sure he wrote about that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's an important thing to remember, is that if you introduce something like that, you've got to give your players. If you give your players a can of whoop ass, they get to open it up at some point and use it, and give them a chance to with some frequency, so they feel important in that regard. They feel the hero. Yeah. So, but Golgi, you've been probably at this almost as long as I have. You're a long-time player, I think, but not a long-time GM. I don't think you've ever GM'd. But what's your background in RPGs, and why haven't you GM'd?
Right. So I think the very first time I ever played was when I was in high school. And this is years ago now. So it was I think it was a Robotech, actually, come to think of it.
Palladium Robotech.
Yeah, Palladium, and so there's that. Then of course University D&D 3rd edition, which was my favorite. Actually 3.5 edition.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've kind of played a bunch at this point. Like Numenera is kind of like the one I enjoy the most at this point. The Chronicles of Darkness series, really, really interesting too. The reason why I haven't done it myself is I guess I'm just really lazy.
And honest.
I mean, I've done. I know basically the mechanics. I know the stories. I've got the background. I just haven't done it because I enjoy playing it, and it's probably kind of selfish on my part. But I am looking at one. One of the worlds I really enjoy is the the Dying Earth world. So that series, Jack Vance, and I know that I think I saw on Kickstarter. I've been funding that, so that looks like that has happened. So I'll be able to get that system, and I'll kind of go through it and get an idea of, well, maybe I could do something with this. It's not something that goes along long term, but it is something that would be, I think, be fun. I think you have to have the really kind of right kind of Jack Vance mindset when you play it, though. So characters that all of them are greedy, selfish, and in it for themselves. So
basically
that would be fun to do. Essentially, yeah. There's not an honorable amongst us. So that's kind of the reason why. I think the only time I ever did run one was very much a one-off session, and I think it was helping you with something at work, kind of demonstrating how role playing could be used as kind of almost like a team building exercise, essentially.
And I think Baron Durop on Game Masterpiece, his channel there on YouTube, he's talked about that as well, and that's one of the things we did as well. I used it as a team building exercise because it really does forge a team. That's the other thing, is you have to let the team coalesce. It's great for everybody to meet in a tavern, but sometimes they need to coalesce on their own. So yeah, but I remember that you did kind of take on. You were all right. You kind of.
I know how to do it. Like I said, I'm just truly lazy.
Well, it's good to be honest. Yeah. But that's the other thing. I mean, it's not for everybody. Like if you're a new game master and you try it out and you're like, oh, I much prefer playing, then play. And if, like, for me, I'm the forever GM. Like, when I started, I had to, because I didn't have anybody to game with. I got introduced to Heroes Unlimited at summer camp. And then and I went looking for it at hobby shops and stuff like that. I'm like, what is this game? This was the greatest and most amazing thing that I can make my own superhero and play my superhero. Like, and there's rules. This is awesome. And then I found this new game on the shelf called Rifts. And I was like, oh, this is the same artwork. Because it was all the Kevin Long artwork and the Keith Parkinson cover that had the tentacled monster on the front and everything like that. And I was like, oh, what is this? This is not the game, I don't think, but it's got all similar artwork. The bionics look the same and stuff like that. And then I found friends, and I'm like, you guys need to play this game with me, because this is awesome. You will love it. And they were hooked. But I was the forever GM because I had the books. And the books were expensive, and there was no way I was going to relinquish the books to my friends who were too cheap to buy their own. So I was the forever GM. And of course, I got all sorts of ideas. I mean, I think I've shared with you guys, like, all the ideas that I keep coming up with, like, for the 3 years that DT was running his game. It's like, oh, and I got an idea for this, and I got an idea for that, and so I'm and even when I'm playing, I have that tendency to want to game master. So, like, if you game master and you're like, oh, this really isn't for me, then play. And if you play and you're like, oh, I really want to try it out, then yeah, grab it and give it a shot. Just throw caution to the wind. The worst that's going to happen is you and a bunch of people that are typically friendly to you. Most people don't play with their dire enemies.
Well,
I know. We brought you in. I understand, but but like, at worst comes to worst, you do a mediocre game and your friends are still your friends and you move on. Like, it's not that bad, and you probably learn. The next game you run will be better. But yeah, if you guys take a look at the screen that I've put up there, these are all the games that Initiative Zero has run so far. Not recorded. We've only recorded First Edition Chronicles of Darkness, but we've played Rifts, the Palladium games, and I show Heroes Unlimited there in the Palladium Fantasy game because those are integrated to some degree. Rifts is a kitchen sink. It has everything. We played 5th Edition D&D. I'd love to take this group through a 2nd edition, 1st edition, or original edition D&D, just for shits and giggles. I don't know what's so giggly about shitting, but anyway. Numenera, like I said, we most of us play tested the 1st edition of Numenera, and it was great. We fit that weird demographic, I guess. But that was really cool. And yeah, and we've been Numenera players ever since. And then, of course, Chronicles of Darkness will be doing a second edition game starting in February. You'll see the recordings on YouTube. Those are kind of where we are.
Didn't we play the Strange
did
as well?
The Strange
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
the Strange,
That's
the Strange.
We
Yes,
also
that's right.
played-
The Strange.
Yeah, we also played Bruce Cordell's The Strange, and that stuff that Golgi was referring to. I just used Cipher System rulebook to build a bunch of different genre adventures, just one shots for different groups to play, and they were pretty good in the sense that they were simple and just kind of classic tropes, like Western or superheroes or rescue the princess on the battle station in your freighter spaceship with your hairy co-pilot. Classic tropes, things like that. But we also played The Strange, and we'll play many other things, I'm sure. But yeah, it's I've been doing this for now 33 years, I think, is how long I've been game mastering. 33 years, and yeah, it's interesting to really see how game mastering has changed in the industry itself, like what's expected of a game master, but also how some things never change, I guess.
Well, I think one thing that I think we talked about this earlier, but there's very different styles too in terms of GMing. So I have a friend I played with when I was in university, very much rules based, and if you screw up, you're going to suffer as a result of it. The joke
that's
with
old school game mastering, though, right?
Very much so, and that's the game he plays, and the joke was, I mean, if you're going to play his game, you should have probably about your character plus 3 other characters to finish things off. And that's obviously not entirely true, but he that was the way he played it. Whereas you and I think DT, the rules are certainly important, and you want to do with what you can within the system itself. It's much more narrative, story based, and having played both of those, I like both of them. I mean, but it really does for me as a player. If I know the style the GM has, it really kind of dictates how I'm going to play it. So, for example, I think I've talked to you about how I used to play Call of Cthulhu, right? So. And I pride myself in having never had a character die. But that's because I knew the person was very much a rule-based per individual. I also knew we were going against cosmic forces that you have no chance of winning against. So, you see the big slithery thing, you run away from it. You don't try to shoot it. You don't try to fight it. You run away. And you play the game in going and deal with the other human beings and try to stop the summoning of Golgotha or whatever. But you don't fight Golgotha because you'll get destroyed. So others, they would try to fight and they would die inevitably. So in a story-based one, though, at least initially, I'm less concerned about dying because I think that the storyteller wants to tell their story. Now, later on, especially when talking about the original Chronicles of Darkness that we played, you certainly dying was definitely a possibility because that's the way you kind of set it up. But initially, the story was really important, and you want to get that kind of narrative down pat.
Well, what I really wanted to do was make sure that the characters had a reason to be together and really forge things. So that's why, like DT, I also had new players, right? People that had never role played before, things like that. I made characters. Basically, I had pre-generated characters that I gave out to people, right? And playing with pre-gens is fine, but I would suggest that part of the appeal and the mystique of role-playing games is fashioning that character. And I guess we could make another video at some point about the completely random role character versus the point by designed character, right? But I mean, for me, the designed character is that alter ego. It's me, but how I would want to be, or an aspect of me that I want to accentuate. Whereas the random roll, excuse me, is really bringing to life somebody new, somebody other that isn't you, right? This is you're forced to take on another role that has been given to you by the laws of randomness.
Yeah, and I'm not somebody who generally enjoys the random roll one, but I think back to my character from Rifts. I've never rolled like that in my life, so I love that character.
Yeah, he got good rolls. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Golgotha, because I was talking with Dark Templar last night, just kind of in some of the preparation for this, and I was thinking about my Rifts character, how my Rifts character was created with random rolls, and my 4 foot tall, 400-pound dwarf Gotrek who hated DBs, right? He was a dimensional being that hated himself, and people liked him. And that was one of the funnest characters I think that I've ever had.
Oh yeah, it can be really rewarding to bring to life somebody that you didn't really have a hand in creating, right? Like, yeah.
I think if it comes to a point buy, and as Magnum, you said, you're kind of creating like an alter ego for yourself or something like that, then we kind of, get stuck into a pattern of, creating the same thing each time.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you want to be a wizard or some kind of spellcaster, or, dealing with, in the Gotham Chronicles, more of the occult.
Yeah, don't drink the red rain. Don't drink the red rain.
You might end up creating that same character each time.
Close your mouth. Don't drink it.
Where you're putting more into intelligence and more into that type of thing. Whereas if you want to be just the meat shield and, that type of stuff, you're putting more points into that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's true because, I'll admit, normally my character, I like playing fighters, and I like playing those kind of characters. So when I'm designing my character, that's kind of what I aim for. So in this Chronicles of Darkness, I was not a fighter. I was not the tank that I often play. So I had to really, I had to really role play him actually, and I think he was a very different character than in the way I played him than I did have most of my other players or my other characters.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, I definitely did it on purpose, just so you know.
Oh, I know that. Yes.
No, I because we've been playing long enough that I know what kind of wheelhouses a lot of these guys play. So I kind of wanted to put them a little bit out of their comfort zone because it makes you play the role, right? And that's the whole point of what we're doing is we are role playing. We're not just playing ourselves or what we decide or what we think of our fantastical selves all the time. I'm pretty sure Golgotha here always thinks of himself as the hero and this gigantic bulking.
Oh yeah, I generally think I'm awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly, absolutely. So I wanted to make sure that he felt as unawesome as possible. Clearly,
but I think even as
you succeeded,
and also his roles
do not do this.
Yes. Also his roles did that for me too sometimes as well. But no, it was the idea is to have fun, right? And you want your character, you want your hopefully your friends or whoever you're playing with to have fun in your game. And to be able to do so, you kind of give them some leeway, right? So, for example, at the end of every session, we calculate points. Obviously, we don't do it on the recording, but I give points out, experience points for this, that, and the other, and they have to justify it every single time if they want to improve something or add a specialty to something. I'm sure those who have played Chronicles of Darkness have an idea what I'm talking about. Those who don't, you gain experience, and they have to justify it to me. And so we have arguments, like straight up arguments about whether it's justified or not. And obviously don't hear some of these things, but you gotta give some leeway too. Like, so maybe I won't give you 5 points in strength because that's like, superhuman strength and you guys are all human. Right. But you kind of maybe give a stat to like lifting things or a specialty in something else that might, not necessarily give exactly what that character wants, but helps them get another, I guess, attribute or specialty that will help in their roles for that particular feature, right? So maybe it's not you give you a strength, but I give you a lifting bonus, right? Or whatever it could be, or like a defense bonus or whatnot, depending on what it is. So yeah, you gotta don't be so stringent, I guess, on experience. Sometimes I can be quite the stringent guy giving experience, especially for role playing, because sometimes it doesn't happen very often, and some people will try to justify that it did, right? Or I'll give 1 point or 2 points to one person or 1 point to another person. Yeah, and give and take, and you want them to role play. I want them to role play their asses off, and on most nights, especially those that are recorded, they do, and they have fun with their characters, even if it's out of their wheelhouse. And I think that being out of your wheelhouse forces you to role play your ass off. And if they don't like it, and they can have a conversation with you afterwards, like I really hate my character or whatnot, or can you cut me some slack here, or as a game master, sometimes you're so focused on what you want that character to be, or your vision, that you don't see their vision, and you gotta obviously be receptive to that as well. Try those conversations.
Yeah. I think that's why I like random roll. I like them both. I like for different reasons point by random roll, but I like random roll because it does force you to role play. And I think it's important to distinguish, and this is one of the ways that when I run first edition Chronicles of Darkness, providing those experiences, I gave 1 point for role playing and then 1 point for acting. And I've always distinguished between those two things, where role playing is you chose to do what your character would do in that circumstance, regardless if it was to his benefit or her benefit or whatever, right? Even, you just did what your character would do. That's role playing, in my opinion. And it's important for new game masters to know that when they're, because people will accuse players of metagaming or cheating, like rolling on the table to the side or something like that. And, but you have to realize that role-playing doesn't mean that they have to be acting, right? Acting, in my understanding of it, is where you invest the emotion. You might change your voice, and you might take on the character, and you really get into it, and speak with an accent and things like that. You kind of do the stuff that you might see in something like Critical Role, where those voice actors take on the character. That's acting. But role-playing isn't to that extreme, right? Role-playing is just literally doing what your character would do based on their personality, based on their alignment or their morality or their virtues, their backgrounds. What would this character do? And that's role-playing. And I think new game masters need to make sure that they really don't expect acting from their players, because that's hard for people. Not everybody's an actor, but it's easy enough for most people to choose something the way that somebody, like, put themselves in different shoes and make choices not based on what they want to do, but based on what their character would do. Now, DT, you talk about cutting some slack to players and things like that, and you talked about it in a very kind of GM to player sense, where you guys are giving the players what they want. But I think one of the big things that really helped you in this past game was early on we were I mean, Mike, gosh, I don't think I've ever rolled as bad as I did in this game. I was just particularly near the end.
Too.
It was horrible. I was a lightning rod for the gods of ill luck. And,
I loved every moment of it. It was awesome.
I know. Yeah,
you're awful.
Yeah, I know. It was terrible.
So
but it was pretty consistent at the beginning of the game, where we weren't making the rolls that we needed to advance the plot the way that you wanted us to.
Yes.
And it was frustrating you. And I remember chatting with you about it, and I'm like, well, one of the great things that I learned reading Monty Cook's Game Master sections and listening to podcasts and things like that. By the way, guys, in any role-playing game that you buy, if you're going to run a role-playing game, read the Game Master section. It is gold. Read the Game Master section, or DM section if you want to talk about Dungeon Masters for Dungeons & Dragons, or Storyteller section, or whatever it is. Any place that gives you advice on how to be a good GM, read that in multiple role-playing games and implement it, because it's good advice. And the one thing that I learned from Monty Cook was failing forward, right?
Yep.
So I'll let DT talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, so failing forward is the idea that let's say that they do not get the successful rolls on whatever it is that they're doing. So you still give them the success, but it comes with a detriment. So, for example, instead of getting hung up on, Magnum make a roll, he failed. Okay, Vahilo make a roll, he failed too, or whatever. You keep on going and going and going. Instead of playing that game, which can be, they could all fail, or it could be too hard, or whatever it could be, right? You want to give the sense that it's still possible that they are going to succeed on it. And even though they failed, they could fail really, really hard, like a dramatic failure, or they could fail just, here or there, a small, maybe not so significant fail, not as dramatic. Failing forward will obviously help you get past that point, continue the plot that you want, because you don't want the story to stall because of just failed rolls. If you want to be that much of a stickler, sure. But if you're a GM and they're constantly failing that, you better have something to back that up, right? There has to be another avenue that you can go to, because obviously it's not going to progress the way you want it to. And it might actually, really hurt your story, or it might hurt the experience, which is, you want to have fun. That's the whole point of all this, to have fun, right? And so by failing forward, and these guys failed forward a lot, and I had to really get past that and give this failing forward, and it really helped, the plot proceed. And in, the characters themselves, or the players themselves, recognize that even though they failed, and they got some type of, detriment, like maybe a broken leg, or a
lost leg,
or any of those kind of things.
Broken girlfriend.
Hey, yeah.
Was that a successful roll on someone else's part?
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it could have been. But anyways, all those things.
I do remember that I bashed a door in really hard and maybe killed somebody as a result.
You did.
Oh, yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Amazing.
I think there was a stool at some time too.
Yeah, some child.
That was somebody that I beat with a stool.
Yeah,
It was episode one.
You
was
were a
episode
terrible,
2,
terrible person.
But that wasn't failing forward, so we'll keep on talking about failing.
Yeah, you
forward.
succeeded amazingly.
That was totally planned.
That was an exception. That was an exceptional success.
Yeah.
That I intended to hit that person with this bar stool.
Yeah. How to Deal with Children by, Vahilo. It's a new book coming out, guys. It's a new book. But yeah, the idea of failing forward, they understood that they were going to get some type of detriment, whether it was like maybe a bashing damage, or they got cut somewhere, or maybe they sprained an ankle or whatnot. But the story could progress, so we're not just hung up on something extremely bad happening to them, or the plot just stalling and waiting for an opportunity for them to roll and perhaps fail that too. That really is something for GMs, especially new GMs, that I would try to get over. You want everything to be as storybook as possible, but it just does not happen that way. And people roll poorly a lot.
Yes.
A lot. And you have to still make that story go. Otherwise, they're going to feel as though every time they fail something, like they let their team down, or they miss this plot point, or they're not going to get this, treasure, or whatever it could be, right? Like all those kinds of things. So, for example, let's just say that myself, I'm playing, and we'll go with Vahilo's playing, and he's going to go at this treasure chest, right? And he has to reach up to grab it, and he rolls and he fails. So you could either be, okay, well, he fails this roll, he can try again. Sure. Maybe and then he fails that one. Oh, great. Now I got to wait another round for everyone, initiative and all that kind of stuff to go around. And he fails another time. So these guys are probably getting beaten up by something, right? And all that Vahilo has to do is grab this treasure chest, and they can all start booking it out of there, or maybe the monsters, fade away, or whatever it could be, whatever your story is. But instead, if he fails forward, right, maybe you give him the second time. We'll say he fails the first time, the second time he fails, but you can give the fail forward. As a result, he is able to grab this treasure chest, but maybe a dart, comes out of the wall that he wasn't able to react quick enough to, and it goes through his arm, or it cuts him really bad, so he's bleeding out or whatnot, right? And it makes even the story richer, because now you're on a real timeline. Like, he's bleeding out, and he has this treasure chest. He's like, we gotta get out of here. Right, or else I'm going to probably die or faint while we're trying to get out of this temple, whatever you want to call it, right? And it makes it that more, adds a little bit of drama to it, and it makes it fun at the same time. Because I think one of the episodes is they're in some vents, and the vents are on fire, aren't they? I think in one of the stories, and
on fire.
Yeah, the hospital.
Yeah, something.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, and they kept failing over and over again. So I gave them, burns.
No, not everyone kept failing.
Okay.
Like cartwheeled out of there backward.
Many people failed rolls, and instead of having them trapped, because really the idea is, they're trapped, then they will die. Their characters will die, and if you're okay with characters dying, that's your prerogative, right? But of course, I want the story to be more dramatic. So they're getting burned, right? So they're getting aggravated damage or lethal damage here and there, and or bashing, whatever it could be, and they're still trying to get through it, and they may make this hop. But they, as they're jumping, their thigh got seared and they lost like a layer of skin. Well, it adds to the actual story, right? You're adding, some elements to it, that some story building, some drama to it, and the characters feel that too. Like, okay, I got to make these rules, or I'm not gonna make it out this way. Otherwise, they could just be stuck in there and they burn to death. Game's over. They're dead, right? But in this case, they're gonna remember that experience, saying like, oh, you can make it all the way to the end, and maybe they'll fail the end, but they get out, you pull them out, but he, gets burned even worse at the end because he failed his role or whatnot. You can decide that as a GM, and it adds to that experience. Failing forward is definitely one of the best, ideas for RPGs. And advice that I would give any GM is allow your players to fail forward, especially, because it definitely helps a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think what follows on that is knowing when to roll. Like, you don't have to roll for everything, right? Roll when the stakes are high. So let's take an example of, your characters kick open the door. It's classic D&D. Kick open door, drooling monster, kill monster, and now it's time to take the treasure. But the treasure chest is locked, right? And the thief, he blows his lock picking, and there's the barbarian with his axe, and he says, well, I want to take a whack at the lock. Now you could sit there and have him roll hits and damage, and eventually he might bust off the lock. But if there's no orcs waiting to bust into the chamber, if there's no bad guys, that are going to hear him clanging away on the rusty lock, or hitting the thud of his axe hitting the chest and stuff like that, then just let him break open the chest. You don't have to roll for everything, right? Like, if there's no consequence to failure, then just have your characters do it. Same sort of thing with spotting things. If it's really important that your characters see something to advance the plot, don't make them roll a perception or a spot check. Just have them see it. That way, they get the information that they need. And I'll take this one from the Alexandrian. If you need your characters to pick up on clues, give it to them 3 times. Anytime you need your characters to have your players to have a clue about something, if they have to actually rely on their own brain power to solve a problem or uncover a clue, make sure that clue is able to be found 3 different ways. And when we do 2nd edition Chronicles of Darkness with the Second City Chronicle in the coming weeks, I plan on walking through, because it's very much a sort of mystery investigative horror, right? That's how Chronicles of Darkness Mortals is set up. They have a very interesting investigation system and clue-making system where you, the game master, never actually come up with the clues. Your players do. And it's kind of really cool. So I'll be walking these guys through that. Tune into those episodes. And every once in a while, I'll give a kind of a side episode, maybe just myself, maybe with one or a few or all of these guys, just on kind of reflections on game mastering techniques that were used in previous stories and things like that. But you don't have to roll for everything, right? That's the thing. Don't let the dice rule. Cool.
But that said, it can be an exercise in creativity. And the example I would give is when we were playing The Strange and we were trying to break into one vault room or another, and everyone tried to get through it in one or another different ways. We had a character that it was Ant-Man. He got real tall and tried to smash through it. It didn't work. Golgotha, I think, was running one of his tankier
No,
permutations.
that was actually me. I was the guy who grew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just,
didn't work.
again, you tried going head first through it, and that didn't really work. Somebody else lined up a shot. That didn't really work. And my character, who was just like a support utility character, walked up and just rolled really well and was like, oh yeah, this door, it has a hinge. So if you pop the pin out of the hinge, the thing just falls open. So it can be a nice creative exercise.
Mhm.
But again, if it's necessary to progress the plot, there's no point in bottlenecking the story over it.
Exactly.
I mean, you could kind of choose middle way here and say, how do you guys want to go about it? And then let everyone put their ideas forward. And then without telling them, whoever rolls the best basically gets it. And that way you continue the story, you keep everyone engaged, but you're not at a mechanical risk.
Mhm.
Well, and
Again.
how many times, even in the sessions that, as a part of the Gotham Chronicle here that we've recorded, somebody would say, well, I'm going to do this. And everybody said, well, even if they didn't have a specialty in it, or were skilled in it, how many times do people just say, well, I'll help, right?
Yeah.
And as a helping role, they might be at a penalty of -1, but they might be able to add 1 or 2 extra dice to somebody else's roll.
Mhm.
Which, if you've seen our rolls, usually is the one that makes the difference. Yeah. How did you get 9 1s and a single 8?
It was talent, raw talent.
Yeah.
Well, remember when Golgotha got 14 dice and failed?
Zero.
Oh, the
Zero.
amount
That
of
was
times that we saw that.
insane.
Oh,
That was
that was
And it
a
wasn't-
shame.
It wasn't just him, though. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was beautiful.
But I made up for it in my second last roll of the game in getting a chance dice to work.
Hey, calm it down there. Let's not blow everything.
Yeah.
Don't spoil the. It hasn't aired
Spoilies.
yet, man.
Unbelievable.
Oh, shoot.
Amateur
Sorry,
hour.
I forgot about that.
But anyway,
Next, you're going to spoil the thing about that person or place.
but that
And the
brings up
things.
Another thing. Really, is failure drives the story too, right? Like those dramatic failures are, I would say, far more interesting than the exceptional successes, right? And the GM intrusions in Numenera and The Strange and other Cypher System games, those are awesome, especially when people go, oh yeah, I'll take the GM intrusion for sure. They just add those unexpected twists, and they really just kind of, it's almost like making sure that your character has flaws, right? Like, even your NPCs, new game masters, make sure they have flaws, because flaws make interesting characters. If people are invulnerable and have no weak points at all, then they're kind of dull. I mean, compare Batman to Superman, right? Like, Batman's far more interesting than Superman. No rebuttal. This is good.
I agree.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I agree.
That's lame.
Okay, this is how I like it. No rebuttal. Okay, but yeah, just like roll with your group's failures to their roles, because they will fail roles, and look at it as opportunities. Especially if there's been something that you wanted to introduce. Sometimes player failure or character failure, players shouldn't. Well, I guess they fail too. Is an opportunity to introduce something that perhaps you weren't able to introduce before. And yeah, like there's another rule that, no skin wasted, right? Like, if you had an idea for something but your characters never went down that path, well, you can just take that idea and reskin it in another place in your story, and your players will never be any of the wiser because they didn't know what you had in mind. They'll just think that idea was always meant for this particular time and place in the story. But that's where a failed roll can sometimes be an opportunity to use an idea that you had before, because your players weren't able to execute their desires, their goals, or their plans. It might be an opportunity for you to execute one of yours. And by execute, I don't mean kill. I mean make it happen. You should never well, you should never kill your players, that's for sure. Try to avoid killing their characters on purpose. If the characters die,
well, yeah, no, don't kill your players. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
If the characters die, it should be by their own doing, right? Not because you've planned their timely death. And if the death of a character is part of the story, always make sure that you check out if that's okay with your player, because people get attached to their characters.
A lot of the points that we've come across really do boil down to the necessity for communication.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a very big part of it that we haven't overtly said yet. Like the amount of dialogue that's required behind the scenes, just both as far as like, I mean, if you want to take it from a perspective of session 0, understanding what people are and are not comfortable with, what the expectations for the game are, what the player should expect, what the GM should be aware of, both, as far as their running of the game and even the player expectations. It just works to get everybody on the same page before you've even started. And outside of the example of the session 0, again, you can roll the tape back on this discussion we're having, but communication throughout is very important. And I mean, we'll talk just amongst ourselves outside of the game, individually and in groups, and it really does help. It helps make sure that we're all seeing things more or less through the same lens, so that you don't end up with any animosity or any hurt feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important. It's, I think another important thing for new game masters to realize is that it's okay to try new things. This goes along with communication, and it's okay to also say, you know what, this new thing just really isn't working, guys. I apologize, but we're going to have to do something different. And just if it's not, don't beat a dead horse. If it's not working for you, you had this great idea and you thought it was going to work out, and it's just not taking off. If you've got open communication with your group, they're going to trust you enough to sit down with you and play this idea out that you have. They're also not going to be like, well, thanks a lot, man, for wasting all of our time, right? Like if you have that, building the relationship with your players outside of the game, even if it's like people that you don't personally know that you just kind of hooked up with on Roll20, and you're like, hey, let's play a game. And people signed up for it. Have that communication with them beforehand and just be like, hey, I'm trying out something new. I'm brand new at this. I'm going to try to make this go. I'm open to suggestions, stuff like that. Just hearing them out, having that personal player game master conversation goes a long way. Or we could do dead air. That too. I don't know. All the conversation just kind of stops. It's good.
There's the lull.
Yeah, good times. Cool.
Well, it wasn't necessarily the worst point to end it on either.
No.
I agree.
No? Yeah. Sounds good. So, we've been going at this for about an hour and a half. So I think, I don't know, does anybody have any last tidbits of wisdom to drop for our new game masters? Or should we just wrap her up?
I'll start here. Just realize as a GM, you have a lot of ups and downs. You're like, what I mean by that is some sessions are going to go great and some sessions aren't. Sometimes you'll have like a character or a player that just kind of takes over, and sometimes you'll have a group of cohesive that works really well, or none of the above. And realize that that's just part of being a GM. It's not always not going to work out for you, and you got to, have a strong mind and be like, okay, well, what didn't work, what worked, and what can I help? Like, what can I not necessarily fix, but improve upon, I guess, for the next session and that. And realize that you might go through 3 sessions, 4 sessions that may not go with what you wrote down, and that's okay too. Let the players play and enjoy yourselves.
Cool. Good advice.
For a new GM, I'd say understand your own expectations. We are not Roll20 in all probability. Or sorry, not Roll20. We are not Critical Role. In all probability, you are not Critical Role. If you go into a game expecting to be Critical Role, you might have a bad time. So I'm not saying, go in with no expectations, but try and check them at the door and keep them reasonable.
Cool.
I'd say just have fun and don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah, good advice.
And I'm at a point where I'm just listening and taking some of this advice as I'm preparing my own game. So, as somebody who has never GM'd before, I want to thank the four of you for kind of providing some of that insight to me and to some of our other listeners out there who might be kind of on the same area that I am with, some stuff that they've put together, and waiting for a time to kind of let loose, or to make sure that they have enough and just kind of fine tuning it.
Yeah, cool. So as a guy that has yet to GM, which of these pieces of advice kind of resonates with you the most?
I think just kind of what we were talking about at the end with a little bit of that communication piece. As we start, and we'll see how long the Second City Chronicle takes us here, but as we start, the game that I've prepared, listening to you guys, and you guys giving me feedback to say, hey, this was really good, this wasn't very good, let's, can we try maybe doing it this way instead, and being able to roll with some of those punches and be flexible. I think that's the biggest piece that I'm going to have to try and do.
Cool. Yeah, well, we're always, me, I'm full of, I just don't know when to shut up, but I guess I've offered a lot of advice so far. I guess my closing bit would be something that I haven't mentioned yet, is that every bit of published fiction that has ever been put into print by a human being, or possibly even things that have never been put into print, are yours to steal. That's all. As if you need ideas, feel free to rip off any television show, movie, book, doesn't matter, comic book, and blend them, fix them as you will. There's only, the monomyth says there's only really one story anyway, but just, those don't think that you have to come up with something completely original. And if you're running a canned adventure, don't think that you have to stick to every written letter in that adventure. You can just improvise, you can cut parts out, you can do what you want to make a really cool time for you and your friends. But with that, I am Magnum Pi. I am here with Dark Templar, Vahilo, Taekcu, and Golgotha, as always. And we are Initiative Zero. I hope that you enjoyed this banter that we've had about game mastering. I hope that it's been helpful to you. Put some chat in the comments down below. Check us out on our Discord page. Like us, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified when we're going to come out with more videos. We've only done actual play to this point. This is our first kind of non-actual play video, but I do plan on having us do more videos of this nature to help people with their role-playing, as well as really just kind of explain the nuts and bolts behind decisions that were made in some of our actual play sessions, so that you can kind of really see this stuff in play as it was developed. So, with that, have a good new Gamemaster Month, and prep, try something new, be brave, be strong, put yourself out there, and most importantly, have fun. And we'll see you guys next time.
Happy night.
Right.
Good night, everybody.
I know.